Hey guys, it's Emily. We've been getting a couple of questions here lately around the executive orders and exactly what that means, what parents should expect, all of that. So instead of writing this really long post on Facebook that people are not going to read, I figure it would be easier just to hop on the camera, talk through it a little bit, kind of point out some of the specifics that caught my attention when reading these, and hopefully kind of give you some, I'll say, next steps or things to look forward to as we progress. So I'm going to hop right in because I want to try to keep this short because I know everybody's super busy and you don't have time to listen to super lengthy videos. So I am going to start with the first one, which is, and I'm reading from my computer, so that's why I keep looking down. The first one is ending radical indoctrination in K through 12 schooling. So if you read the actual text of this executive order, the immediate thing that popped out to me was there are no acronyms, there's no jargon in it, there's no reference to DEI, CRT, anything like that. It's just radical ideologies. And typically, I don't like really broad, vague terms in stuff like this, but in this instance, I actually think that is better for parents because we can determine what is radical ideologies. Most of it's pretty simple, right? It's like the transgender stuff, sexual orientation, all that. But this doesn't specifically call any of that out, which I think was really good. It does give some definitions in there. It talks about race, sex, color, national origin, all of that. It talks about, teaching that the country is systemically racist, that there is like oppressor, oppressive mentalities, all those biases, all that craziness. So it does give a little bit of background, but it doesn't like specifically call out a program by name. So it gives a lot of information. I will admit this is one of the longer ones, but it was really worth reading. It talks about really and truly like kind of the next steps, like I mentioned. The immediate thing for this one is that there is no action for parents right now in terms of reporting anything. So the immediate thing is there's a group of people that are identified in the executive order. They basically have to get together, come up with a strategy of what the president has to do in terms of policy to actually implement and enforce this executive order and flow it down. They've got 90 days to do that, and then they kind of figure out the next steps. So that's the immediate thing that's going to happen with this. What I did when I read through it, kind of got an understanding of it. I went ahead and used all the knowledge that's in my head from all of my months of research. And I sent an email to the State Board of Education, all the board members, and the state superintendent, and basically said, these are the executive orders. And I referenced this one in particular and said, here are the things that I know off the top of my head that violate this executive order. And if you're in violation of the executive order, you're going to lose federal funding. Obviously, we do not need that. So we need to be proactive in figuring out what we're going to do to remove these programs, because all of the programs that I sent are things that are deeply embedded in the school system. So from the top of my head, the ones that I can remember, obviously I called out SEL as being divisive, and I referenced several materials that talk about the components of SEL and how it pushes the idea of systemic racism. So SEL is, by virtue of the content within it, in violation of this executive order. So SEL is going to have to be removed. SEL is not a book that they just give kids. It's deeply embedded into all the curriculum. Removing SEL is going to be a massive undertaking. The other one I pointed out was multi-tier support services. It's similar to SEL. It's just kind of builds upon, I guess, the foundations of SEL. It really gets into mental health and counseling services for kids without parental consent. So that's going to be a major issue. I talked about, what was the other one? The online libraries that we've got on the kids' computers, Sora and Epic. They're on every single computer in the state. I would say they're probably on every computer across the country, but obviously I don't have kids in other states to be able to validate that. But it's on every computer in the state, and it's automatically loaded. So it's not like the superintendents even know that it's there. And if you don't know it's there, you don't know that it's violating this executive order. And I know it's in violation of the executive order because I've gone through the content and found tons of stuff from pre-K all the way up to 12th grade that just pushes radical ideologies, whether it's sexual orientation, LGBT stuff, just graphic sex. It's crazy the stuff that's out there. So I mentioned a couple other ones. I did mention Title IX, but I'm going to save that for a minute. But anyways, I sent that email. I basically got a very polite, yeah, we'll get around to it when we're forced to kind of email. So immediate resistance from the Department of Education, which is concerning because, like I said, if we don't comply with these executive orders, we lose federal funding. And if we lose federal funding, we can't keep our schools open. That is really bad. We have hundreds of thousands of kids that go to public school. They need to be able to go to school. So complying with these is going to be a major issue. So like I said, they've got time. There's no immediate action for the states to do anything right now and remove content, but they need to be proactively working towards this now because these things are so deeply embedded. And that's my concern is we're going to be reactive and we're not going to get it all. We're going to be non-compliant. And then what happens? So I kind of rambled on that one and I apologize, but that is the executive order ending radical ideologies in K through 12 school. The next one is defending women from gender ideology extremism, not to be confused with the one about protecting women's sports. They're very similar. There's a lot of overlap, but they're actually distinct executive orders. Defending women from gender ideology. This one deals more with defining two sexes, male and female, that you can't change over from one to the other. This one talks a lot about gender ideology in general, because obviously that's kind of the crux behind this whole theory of multiple genders and all of that. There is one piece in here, and I'm trying to find it. I had it highlighted and pulled up, but then I moved my page. But it talks about basically like who has to follow this executive order. And it talks about federal grantees have to abide by this executive order. And I thought I'd found it, but I can't find it. Why that matters is that it's going to apply to every single public school and public library. If they receive federal funding, they have to follow this executive order that will prohibit anything around gender ideology. So obviously, we know our schools are going to be subject to it because they receive massive amounts of federal funding. But also, here it is. I finally found it. Here's the quote, or here's the line that I was looking for. Federal funds shall not be used to promote gender ideology. Each agency access grants conditions and grantee preferences to ensure grant funds do not promote gender ideology. So I kind of stumbled through that, but what it's saying is federal funds can't be used for it. If anyone uses or receives federal funding through a grant, they have to comply with this executive order. So like I said, we know our public schools are going to be subject to this, but also public libraries. If they're receiving federal grants, which we're pretty sure most of them receive one, they're going to be subject to this as well. So Space Camp, that was another one that came to mind when I read it. A lot of these programs that work in conjunction with the schools are also going to be subject to this executive order. So it's very broad reaching because it's anyone that gets federal funding, which is pretty much everybody. There's a very few that don't. And then the next one, this was the one most recent, keeping men out of women's sports. Again, it's pretty extensive in the detail. It talks about, excuse me, not just sports, but it talks about locker rooms, changing rooms, bathrooms, all of that. It's really good. Love it. It does talk in here about how state level attorney generals are going to have to identify best practices and how to enforce this. So it does immediately put onus back on the states, whereas the other ones don't do that yet. Like it will eventually flow down because they're creating the committees for those. But this one specifically, like he just says, state attorney generals get in there and start doing some cleanup. So this one I would expect a little bit quicker action in the states on this. We shall see. In the email that I mentioned earlier, I did reference in the initial email that these executive orders are going to impact Title IX. Now, we all know Title IX is back to the original intent of protecting women's sports. We've got past the crazy Biden era trying to change it all. But there's a lot of school boards out there that have not updated their policies to reference two sexes. It still has reference to gender identity or gender expression. I have contacted a couple of those schools, and they very politely told me, we're not going to update this until we're told to do so by the federal government, which is a really crazy answer because they should just fix this. My assumption is that most of them are going to do it this summer, because updating them it's a big lift. So I don't expect them to just update it multiple times throughout the year. So my assumption was they're going to be updating them this summer. And I was very shocked to hear that, no, we're not going to do it until the federal government makes us. So the federal government's making them through various executive orders. Now this latest one tells the attorney generals to make sure that it's happening. So we're going to be reaching out to the attorney general here in Alabama to say, here are all the school systems that we're aware of that are in violation of this. This needs to be corrected ASAP. It's that simple. Let's see. There's a couple more. So the DEI program, this one, it got a little bit outside of just schools, but I did think it was pretty interesting, and I wanted to make sure to kind of walk through it. It's the same thing. It's going to deal with anybody that's receiving federal funding, and they can't just have their DEI program. They've got to completely abolish it. It specifically calls out the director for OMB to develop a list of any entity, agency, whatever it is, that had a DEI office and just changed the name. Like, they kept the people, they kept the purpose, they kept the whatever, and they just changed their name from DEI to something else. What came to mind when I read that is the city of Huntsville had a DEI office, and they've changed the name to Multicultural Affairs. Now, I will admit they also had a Multicultural Affair office prior to DEI becoming a thing, so they're kind of reverting back to what they originally were. But the question is the intent and the activities that that organization is hosting. And it's going to be the same everywhere. You can change the name of it, but if you're still doing the same activities, then you still have a DEI office. If you change your name and you completely change how the different things that you're doing and your intent, then you don't have a DEI office. You've got something different. So that was kind of the takeaway in the DEI bill, is if you've just changed your name, that still has to be reported up to the director of OMB. And this is really dealing more with like federal agencies. I don't think they're getting down to like every little township and city out there. But if it's someone that has received federal funds, then they are going to be held to this. So just something to think about with colleges, universities, all that. If they're receiving federal funds, which most of them do, and they still have that group there with the intent of doing the same things they've always done, then they still have a DEI office. That's something that's going to have to be monitored and reported. Those are the big ones that I wanted to go through. We did meet today with Congressman Dale Strong's office. He is our congressional delegate here in Huntsville and pretty much all of North Alabama. So met with his office this morning, talked through a couple of the concerns we have in terms of Alabama complying with these executive orders, and really just kind of talking through what I've shared here, right? Like, I've contacted the Department of Education about this. The immediate response was resistance of, well, we'll do it when we have to, but not a minute before that. So we did ask the question of, well, what happens next in terms of us holding our leaders accountable? And they don't know, which is expected. All this is new. It's very fresh. So they just don't know yet, which is fair. But of course, wanted to kind of press that and say, how do we figure out that reporting mechanism while we have time to still plan? Because we don't want to get to the point of things are supposed to have been implemented, the state saying they're doing it, we find out they're not, and then ask the question of how do we report, and they have to figure it out then, right? We want to get to the point of, we know how to report problems before we've identified the problems. So that way, when we identify them, it's, okay, here's the process, here's the person, whatever. So they are working through that. They have a couple people that they're reaching out to. They're going to put us in contact with to try to figure out really, how do we establish that line of communication? So we're working through that. Like I said, I've sent all of the information that I pulled together around these known programs that I sent to the State Board of Ed. I've also sent that to Dale Strong's office, so they are aware of that. And we have a couple more things we're going to be sending out specific to Title IX. Like I mentioned, we're going to send a note to the AG's office and just list out, here are the schools that we're aware of that have issues. And there's a lot. So far, I've looked at about 20 counties. In those counties, I've looked at least one system in those counties, and their Title IX policy is an issue. They're going to have to update it. So there's lots of work ahead of us to ensure that these executive orders are implemented, enforced, followed to a T. But now is the time to get ahead of that, start finding out what's going on in the kids' schools. And that way, when we've got the reporting mechanism, we're ready to roll. So a couple of you have reached out, said you've got time on your hands, you want to get involved. Research is the key. Find out what is going on in your kid's school, in your local library. Let's have a list of all the things that we know that are wrong, that need to be fixed. Give these agencies, entities an opportunity to fix it. And if they don't, then let's be ready to report when the time comes. So that's a lot. I was trying to keep this at like 3 minutes and I'm at 16. So I went well over my time limit, but there's a lot going on with the executive orders, and I just want to try to help everybody understand that, let you know what we're doing to prepare for implementation of that, and then helping you guys report when you find things. So as always, if you have questions, reach out, let me know. Let Elizabeth, Desiree, whoever it is. Chris is our person for the library. She can answer any question on that. I promise you she's better at it than I am. So if you have questions, reach out, let us know. We're here to help. We're here to help teach you, research with you, whatever it may be. We just want to make sure that you feel empowered to protect your rights as a parent and those of your kids. So hope this was helpful. Send us feedback, and we'll be sending out more information shortly on Alabama's legislative session and where we are with that. I don't want to put too much in one video because it just gets confusing. So thanks, guys. Hope this was helpful, and let us know what we can do to assist you. Have a good night.